The Wholeness Network. Awaken to the reality of wholeness. In this episode, best-selling author William Paul Young shares his unparalleled wisdom and wit behind the making of his most famous book, The Shack. I heard him in an interview back in November and was so intrigued I listened to it 3 times in one day. I reached out, the stars aligned, and long story short, we now call him friend. So everybody wants to know the story. I know you've told it 1,000 times, but how the shack came to be. Just give us some information.
And I love telling it.
Good.
I mean, it's so unexpected.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be a published author. It wasn't on the bucket list.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't on any of that. And but I grew up on the other side of the planet. I grew up in the highlands of New Guinea, and we didn't have a lot of technology. And so the only way I could get out of my world, which had a lot of sadness to it, as well as incredible wonder, but the only way to really get out of my world was reading. And so I learned to write by reading. And then as I got a little older, I would write. I was talking to someone that I was in boarding school with, and they were talking about how I was always writing. I don't remember that, but writing became a way to get my inside world out, and reading to get out of my world. And so over the years, a lot of my writing was pretty dark. I think nightmares sometimes are a way to try to get the garbage from the inside out, and so a lot of my early stuff was pretty harsh, and I'd burn it anyway because I couldn't take the risk my dad might find it. But slowly over time, I started to write poetry and short stories and songs, and I'd give them to friends and family because it's a way to tell people that you love them and you care about them. And they liked them, but they're my friends and family. So Kim liked my writing.
Yeah.
And I was about 46, I think, when she started saying, someday as a gift for our children, would you just write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box? But I didn't feel healthy enough to do that until the year I turned 50. And suddenly it's like, oh, right, I've got 40 minutes each way to one of my 3 jobs, and I could do this. I had nothing else to give the kids for Christmas. So I could write whatever this is Kim's been wanting me to write. And I started with, here's funny, I'm writing on the train, and I think, I'm writing these conversations, just asking my questions, because I've always been a question asker.
Yeah.
And they're living these conversations. I'm finding out, these are really cool, So I was writing on the backs of grocery bags. I mean, it was happening like all the time. So I'm writing this in the train, and then I think, I could give this to the kids and call it Conversations with God. And I look up, and there's a marquee on a movie theater that says Conversations with God. I go, somebody already took it. I'd never heard of it at that point. So it was like, but then, I wanted to put it into story. And what I'm basically doing is saying, I want to write something for my kids that expresses to them the things that matter to me. I don't want them growing up with the God that I grew up with, for example. And so it was like, story, because every human being is a story. And we have an affinity with story, and story slips past our watchful dragons. And so I thought, so who's writing this? Who's having these conversations? And that's where Mackenzie came. But in the course of working on the story, and it just bloomed because I was working 3 jobs,
Yeah.
I'd never taken a class or whatever. I'm just trying to get it done for Christmas. And it just flowed. It was like jumping in a river. And the symbolism was there from the beginning, and the character of God was there from the beginning, and so it was And a lot of people don't realize that I'm both Mackenzie and Missy, right? Both names, by the way, are Mackenzie Allen Phillips, which spells map, but Melissa Ann Phillips also spells map. And a writer from Nashville said, when she read the book first, she said, I don't know who you are, but my sense is that Missy represents something murdered in you as a child, probably your innocence. And Mackenzie is usually the adult trying to deal with it. So I get it done for Christmas and make my 15 copies at Office Depot. And 6 went to the kids, copy to Kim, copy for me, just to keep. Gave the extras to my friends and went back to work. It had never crossed my mind one time to publish this thing.
Wow.
And those 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that book to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Your kids, it takes them a while. It's like, a book, really? We'll get right on that.
Thanks,
Yeah, thanks, Dad. So it took them a while. And just as an aside too, a few years later when we put it into print, Kim says, when I asked you to do this, I was thinking like 4 to 6 pages.
Oh.
I'm surrounded by people who love me but aren't impressed. It's a great thing. It's a great thing.
So, I think it's just amazing that you were able to think about story, because in story, then I can draw my own, I can relate differently. Where it's
good
just,
story.
Yeah, story.
Opens up more space than it uses. C.S. Lewis had the idea that the inside is bigger than the outside.
Yeah.
And good story does that.
Yeah.
I come from a modern evangelical Christian fundamentalism. That's where I grew up. And they lost the art of telling story, and they would turn it into propaganda. And as soon as you put an agenda in it, and are trying to say you need to think and hear what I hear.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, you've turned it into propaganda, and you lose the art.
You lose. And I there was a book I read that I connected with about myth. Connecting, myth is actually the most beautiful thing to try and make it an exact story. It'll never be that way.
Yeah.
And I recognize that even a movie, when you can watch the trailer and get an idea, but it's nothing near the movie, and the movie's nothing near the book.
Yeah. And good story intersects you at a place where you're at and nobody else is at.
Right.
So if you ask 20 people what they got out of the shack,
Right.
you're going to hear different things, and you're going to hear them say, well, then I read it a year later and I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
Yes. Because their life had journeyed into the story.
Right.
And now they get to meet it at a different spot.
Right.
So there's a really beautiful dynamic in storytelling.
It came at a good time. To put it into story I think that was the most perfect way to bring it.
Timing is the sandbox of the Holy Spirit. That's all I think. It's like, I had no clue what I was doing and what the ripple effect of it would be. None at all.
Right.
And like I said, 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that to do. All this is God's sense of humor.
Yeah.
Or I like to tell people it's proof that God can still speak through Balaam's ass. That's the Old Testament for anybody that's wondering if I'm just being sacrilegious here.
I love it. So I've heard you say before that Kim wanted to know, she wanted you to get on paper how you think.
Yes.
What is that?
That's why she thought 4 to 6 pages would be sufficient.
What did she see unique? Would you
Well,
talk at night, or how did she know what you thought?
Because I had been vocal over my lifetime, and my struggles with religion had been not hidden, but I was trying to approach it in a way that was still kind.
Yeah.
I had enough chips on my shoulders as it was.
Yeah.
So as I would teach things or as I would communicate things over the course of years, and I'd been silent before I wrote the book. I'd been silent for about 13 years. I'd hit a wall and decided, like, I'm done talking. You know what? I really have no clue. And so as I'd begun to talk again, and it connected with things that I could see. Even when I was so damaged I didn't know how to live it, I could still see things, right? And so over the course of those years, it was like, just put it down somewhere so that our kids can see this story, because it's bigger than the text, right? And it turns out that I'm a good communicator. So I know, surprise, right? Yeah, who'd have thought? That's funny. You know, my mom passed away New Year's Eve day last year, right? So a year ago, thank you. And she was 90 years old. And I'm certain that the last thing she said to me, you know, we were in her room and she kind of looks at me funny, like moms do. And I go, "What, Mom? What?" She goes, "You're my son. Who would have thought?" And I'm going like, "You're exactly right. Who would have thought?" You know. But I've always grappled with big picture questions. You know, who's God? Why are we believing this? It doesn't make any sense. Why do we treat women this way? That doesn't make any sense. You know. And so when it did, I come from another culture.
Right.
So I had the advantage in a sense. The disadvantage is I couldn't find anywhere to belong. But the advantage was I could see from outside the culture. The problem was I was damaged, and so that became a place of power, right? And I'm not a big guy, but I could hide knives inside words. And if I can see the inconsistencies in your world because I'm from outside of it, that becomes, you can weaponize that, you know. And if you do it nicely, they know they're bleeding, but they don't know who quite cut them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was, go ahead, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Well, my question goes back to your childhood, because you're obviously such a tender-hearted person. How what were your coping mechanisms? How did you survive all that trauma and hardship as a child?
Yeah.
What did you do?
I think everyone is born tender-hearted. And children by nature trust until someone teaches them that it's dangerous. So if you take the combination of my dad, who had no capacity or chip for being a dad, you know, his dad had busted that before I ever showed up, but I didn't know that. I just knew that he was a mean and furious man. And he was a violent disciplinarian, and I was the firstborn child. I was a year old when we went into the highlands in Guinea. And so I did not bond to him at all. You know, he was terrifying to me. And so I had night terrors growing up, not just because of him, but sexual abuse started in the culture before I was 5, and there was a lot of that. So whatever fragility and tenderness, it had the hell beat out of it by the time I went to boarding school. So at 6, I was sent away to boarding school, and the first nights the big boys would come and molest the little boys. And so, you know, what were your coping survival skills? All the standard ones: hypervigilance, becoming a really good liar. I think that's partly why I'm a good storyteller. I said earlier that good liars make good storytellers. And to use the imagery of the shack becomes the broken house on the inside, right? For some people who grew up well, affirmed, encouraged, they don't have a house of shame on the inside, but I think the majority of people do.
I think so,
And so people help you build that house, and for a lot of us, we didn't get good help. So that's where we store our addictions, that's where we hide our secrets, that's where we never want anybody to find their way in, because we're terrified that we'll see the same look of disgust on their face that we feel for ourselves. And so coping mechanism: you take a few timbers from your shack, drag them 100 yards out, and build a facade. You know, like in the movies, it looks like a building, but it's not a building.
Right.
The thing about a facade is that you can paint it as fast as you can pick up people's expectations. So some of the survival skills of hypervigilance, not having any boundaries, but so you survive by picking up the boundaries of those around you. And that's a coping mechanism. So you're constantly reading the audience, right? And when you constantly read the audience, then you can adjust to try to perform your way into some sense of approval and affection. But the danger of that is that you totally get caught by secrets, right? And it's a two-edged sword. both which cut you. On the one hand, I can't tell you my secrets because I'm terrified you'll see the truth about who I am and be as disgusted as I am. And I need, at the same time, I'm trying to be strong and disassociated and live in my head, disassociated as a survival skill. You become an intellectual, and hide inside words, and so I can't tell you my secrets, but I still need those little bits of light, some kindness, some approval, some affection. So I'm working so hard to win affection and approval, but when I get it, I don't believe it, and here's why: because you don't know the secrets. I have fooled you. And I remember graduating my undergraduate degree, Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, the whole thing, and walking out with the thought, I fooled them. Wow. Because nothing is true and good from the inside out. That has already been so obliterated. You can only live from the outside in.
So, at what point did you start turning that around? When did you begin your healing journey?
Well, I think I was pursued my entire life. I think that is the commitment of God who loves us to us, and that is that I'm pursuing you from day one, inside the tragedy and the losses. So I can look back and say, here were milestones where things shifted, but because things would catch you sideways, my safest place in my life as a child was in a rainstorm. And the reason is because the first real house we had, because at first we had a little shack, and the whole wall had to come down during the day so that the tribal people could see everything. Because if you closed up and you were in there, they would begin to think you were creating some kind of black magic, and they'd have burned us alive. And so and we were under the constant threat. Now, I was unaware of it because I grew up Donnie. I grew up tribal. My parents were doing the mission. My mother was a nurse. She was doing the medical side. This is a tribe that had never seen a white person. Nobody knew their language. At 5, I was the informant when Wycliffe came in to translate, right? But I was also around the conversations where the Donnie were trying to figure out whether to kill my parents or not.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so I didn't even know I was white till I went to boarding school. I mean, it was not a conscious awareness.
Right.
And so the first real house we had, when we finally had an airstrip, we built an airstrip, and they flew in sheets of aluminum. So we built an aluminum house, aluminum walls, aluminum roof, and this is in the tropics, the highlands between the coast near the equator and glaciers in Guinea. And when the monsoons would hit, it would be so loud I could be this far from you and I could scream and you couldn't hear me. Wow. So I couldn't hear my dad, I couldn't hear him coming, I couldn't say anything wrong.
Right.
And so even now, if I'm in a really strong rainstorm in a car or something, it's just like I get electric, So isn't that a whisper that says I'm here, but even as a child. So, but I built the facade pretty well. Turns out that I am creative and I am smart, which only empowered my ability to hide. It probably drug it out, 20 years beyond what it should have. Yeah. And and one of my survival mechanisms was to leave. Of course I justified it because I'm a good liar, especially to myself. And I'd go like, oh, I think I hear God call me somewhere else. You have a thin layer of perfectionist performance covering up an ocean of shame. And then people start poking down through once they start to get to know you and not just the facade. And that's when you hear God call you somewhere else, And then, so I'd moved all my life anyway, 13 schools before I graduated high school.
Oh my goodness.
So the big cataclysmic hit the bottom event was in '94. And I was 38, married to Kim. We had our 6th child. Matthew had been born. And January 4th, 1994, I got a 1-sentence phone call from Kim. when it was, I'm waiting at your office and I know. And what she knew was I was in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. And at that point it was either kill myself, which is almost hitting the bottom, right? Not quite. Or hitting the bottom. And facing it all. And that's when everything began to unravel and dismantle. And that started an 11-year journey. It took him and I 11 years to heal. And 11 years to do the work. Including some intense therapy, including letting people into my world, including becoming a truth teller, you know, forgiving. I mean, so many components to that journey.
And you have to get over the trauma of the past to be able to do that. You can't just switch.
And it's not getting over the trauma of the past in the sense that it is now gone. It is working our history the way that it truly is, and realizing that it's become part of the sound that we are now. Right? And so it's not extricating the past. And even though, I don't know who says it, but the wake doesn't drive the boat. The wake does drive the boat.
Right.
You know, there is a power in what is behind us that has to be addressed. And people, you know, my people are so good about like, oh, the old is gone, the new has come, old things are passed away, all things become new. And because they don't want to deal with the junk. And as a result, they don't do any work on the inside either. Because the inside is where we carry all that history. And if you don't do the work, you're stuck, and you're going to stay stuck. And, you know, but thankfully, God is a redeeming genius, and will find a way into that darkness to help you begin to build in a direction that's forward. But you got to deal with history.
And that's what we love about wholeness, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, it is part of your wholeness.
Yeah.
It's not something to cut off and leave behind. It's part of what made you who you are.
And you know, and it's hard work.
Yeah.
But it's worthy work.
Yeah.
And it's so embarrassing, but it's not shaming. You know, and you gotta learn to turn your face into it and deal with it in the face of the person that's in front of you. So we never made my adultery the new secret, right? When I drove across town and into the office that I owned at the time, business office, and Kim had already torn it apart because she's the force. She and her 5 sisters are called the Force, and they're Minnesota, North Dakota girls. There's no 50 Shades of Grey in Minnesota, North Dakota, and so Kim had torn the place apart, and she lights into me with all this fury. And after about 4 hours, I said, "Okay, Kim, if we're going to do this, I need to tell you every secret I have, because secrets have been killing me my whole life." And naively, she said, "Bring it on." And it took me 4 days to tell her everything she didn't know. And it destroyed her.